We are talking about the benchmarks that you need to have for your Hyrox training and other ones that you might just want to skip. So I'm going to go through a couple different reasons and what you should look for an effective benchmark and why and when you should do these benchmarks throughout your training. So what a benchmark is, right, is just going to be how a workout or some sort of measurement that you can test yourself over time, to test your progress, to test where you currently are, to test where your fitness capacity is. So these are things, as I'm putting them to my own training and athletes that I coach, that I use sparingly. I like to have them up front and then use them throughout when we need them. But a lot of times, based and depending on which benchmarks you choose to use, there are some pros and cons. So basically, what should you look for in a benchmark workout? So really, what you want to look for these is it testing your raw fitness. Is this something that there is no other way that you can explain the results other than just what you're capable of doing? And things that you might want to shy away from is there outside factors like the weather or just like your effort? Are those things going to play a bigger factor or some factor, even just a little bit of a factor for where your progress and your fitness is heading? And yes, there might be a place where you might want to test that effort, but you can test your effort in training, right? It doesn't need to be from one time versus the other. So does it test your raw fitness or are there other elements? Another reason you should do this is to collect data for your training, right? Like if you do a benchmark, then you can take the result of that benchmark and then apply it directly to your training down the road. Like, can what you did in that benchmark then give you an idea of what you should be able to do within any given training session? That's a great reason to use a benchmark, just so you can understand what you're capable of and where your capacity currently is, so you can maximize each workout that you are doing around the metric that you're following. And of course, testing your progress. How are things going? How is your training going block after block, year over year? This is just a way to kind of celebrate. And these type of benchmarks, I don't find much different than the actual race itself, because the race itself, that basically is what that is, right? It's seeing how your progress is changing over time. And having a benchmark in there, if there is a longer drought in your training, or if you just want to have a little bit of confidence to know that you are improving year over year, block after block, and things are going well, or if your training has been not as strong, or if you've changed things, right? If you've changed things and you understand what the difference, and you want to understand like what you were doing in previous blocks, was that helpful toward a benchmark, or can you just like not do those things and just do what's actually effective? Does it change the outcome very much? So those are reasons to do benchmarks. And when you're planning to do a benchmark, that's what you should really run, like a mental exercise you should run through to decide what benchmarks you are going to do. So here's what I would avoid. I would avoid anything that's kind of adjacent to what we're doing here in whatever sport, right? We're talking about Hyrox most of the time, but is it something that kind of relates but isn't exactly it? So like an example would be something a little bit like, I don't know, like Fran, right? Like, is your Fran time better? 21:15.9 thrusters, pull-ups, classic CrossFit benchmark. If you've done CrossFit, you've probably done Fran. Is that something that is actually going to be indicative of your race performance? Or is it just something kind of like next to your, like it's kind of like it's fitness, but is it distracting? Like, is it something you need to do? Like, not really. Is it fun? Sure. If it's part of a workout, but I wouldn't use it as a benchmark test. Same kind of thing. Is it something that effort can make up for fitness? Right. And I touched on this up top, right? We want it to be raw fitness. But there's some things where just like effort or pacing or just like a change in approach can really improve your outcome. And like I guess like that's going to help your ability as a racer, as a strategist, as someone who is improving as an athlete, there is merit to that. But like, what are we getting from it? You know, if you are doing a test where the pacing can be screwed up or your effort can matter, then other factors like stress, nutrition, all these other things. And like, look, if that's something that you need to get better at, then sure. It's like, oh, I've tried this stress management technique, or I've been tracking my macros, and now I want to see how that changed my outcomes. Sure. But is it really going to be that helpful if you're just like, oh, I just paced it better this time, and that's why I can explain away this result. Um, and the last one is like, it shouldn't really kill you. This is one that's a little bit trickier. Like we're talking about the race, like the best way to do some kind of comparative, we'll say for Hyrox, just to do a Hyrox, but like that's pretty hard. That's pretty hard, and you'll probably be pretty sore. So you don't want to set yourself back by doing benchmarks. So can you recover easily from it? And is that going to be is that effort useful in your training stimulus? And if it's too much, then I would say no. So, what are these benchmarks? Now that we got all that stuff out of the way, what are the actual benchmarks then? What are the things that we should do for Hyrox during our training block? And what do I do? And what do some athletes that I coach and the people that I know, what do they do? So, these are the benchmarks that I would suggest. I would suggest a 2K row and a 2K ski. So 4-time, 2,000 meters of rowing, of skiing. Not back to back. I would probably do these in separate weeks because the effort is so demanding that it's hard to mentally go there. And it's hard to really want to do something like this. When you do one of these, it's like, okay, that's it for the day, because ultimately you should get to where you need to go. Now, there is certainly an element of pace with this, but most of us are going to be between, 6 and 9 minutes. So it's not that long where the pacing can be that different. So I would suggest starting out at something that you could do. And something that is fair for this is what you do during like the Hyrox ski. Like you can do it for 1,000. You should absolutely be able to do this for 2,000. So in the early part of this benchmark, I would be pretty cautious because it is short. It feels like it's going to be a sprint, especially because we are doing events that are 60 plus minutes. So it's like, wow, 7 minutes. I'm just going to go as hard as I can. But that's still 5 minutes longer than what you can do at an all out sprint, right? Around 90 seconds is where you can complete work that is anaerobic. And then you start to really need to have some sort of lactic buffering or some sort of aerobic recycling of your byproduct. And usually you're just going to crap out. If like you're going too hard and you're 600 meters in and you're in a pain cave, there's not going to be an option to keep going fast, and you're just going to really kind of peter out. So if you are hitting both of these at a pace that you can do at least through 500, I would suggest through 1,000 and cutting things down as you go if it's your first time ever doing it. And then finishing as hard as you can. You'll make up a lot of time on the back half if you are just staying consistent up front and something that's a little bit more controlled and then sprinting home the back. You'll end up being pretty close to where you would be if you had even splits throughout. And then what I would suggest if you do it again is to start at what your finishing pace per 500 was. So say you did 2 flat, right? You ended up doing 8 minutes. And if then you're like, okay, I know I can do 8 minutes, and you feel like you've done a lot more row work, your capacity is a lot bigger. Like, I'm going to start at 2 and then cut the work down from there, as opposed to being like, I think I could do 155s now. I'm going to start there. You might be wrong and you might not be able to do it. So I would always suggest kind of negative splitting through this to give yourself a better shot to execute it well. So that's for the row and the ski. And why this is important, right? Like, yes, we just talked about how some of the tactics can change the outcome, but it's so short that it won't change it that much. And you can't really fake this, right? You can't, you're like, I'm just going to try harder next time. It's like, like you're going so hard that you're not going to be able to access what you think you can do just mentally. There's a point where something in, a more aerobic event like Hyrox where effort is a real thing, but in these anaerobic ones, you can't like mentally push through some discomfort, and the discomfort that you get in a 2K, you just really can't push through it. So that's why it's more of a test of raw fitness. And plus, you're going to get some data. I really like to have a good idea of what a 2K is so that I can plot out my actual paces that I want to hit during training and for the racing. So in general, I think that a 2K pace, if I'm doing like threshold, say something that I would get me that anaerobic threshold response. And a lot of times the ski in the row, it's not going to be the same as running, right? Like running is going to be something we can hold for about 45 minutes to 60 minutes of race effort. And that we can consider kind of our anaerobic threshold if we're going to use pace as our main metric for that. But on the ski in the row, and as hybrid athletes, Hyrox athletes, we are not as muscularly conditioned to hold something for 45 minutes to 60 minutes of racing, right? So we're going to get a little bit more of that anaerobic threshold response at a pace that we won't be able to hold for as long. So think about it, it'd probably be closer to like your 5K ish pace, like 20 to 30 minutes, I would say. But again, that's a test we don't want to do. If we do that kind of test, effort and pace is going to change it considerably. So you can take your 2K and then add about, I would say, 5 to 7 seconds per 500. And it's going to be something you could hold for probably about that 30-minute mark, that 25-30-minute mark. And that's where I think that threshold is. So if you're doing like threshold intervals on the ski and you have a 2K time, you can be like, okay, 2 minutes plus 5 to 7 is 205 to 207. That should be where I should hold and be able to do on short rest. And then you could take what you have done in your 2K and kind of plan out for what you want to do on the race. So I found, this is me personally, and just from gathering information from I talk to people. I'm out there. I got my ear to the ground. I'm talking to people. The pace, what you can expect from your ski 2K to your Hyrox pace is going to be pretty close to where that threshold is. It's probably going to be a 2K plus 4 to 7 seconds per 500, depending on how proficient you are and how much time you're putting on that is where that spread is going to be. If you don't do a ton of time on the ski, you might want to be closer to that 7, 8. So again, if you're too flat, you'll be like, okay, at a Hyrox event, I should probably do 205. And you'll come off of it feeling, tired because you're racing and it's still hard, but manageable. And that's what we want to aim for. We want to maximize this, each station, each machine, each split as much as possible without tipping ourselves over. That's really the key to Hyrox in general. There you go. There you have it. No more information needed. Just go as fast as you can without exploding. Hyrox. And then on the row, I found it can be it's much slower because it's way later in the race. So it's going to be about plus 8 to 11 off of your 2K, I think is a fair place to be, which if you do that in training is going to be pretty comfortable, right? It's going to be pretty comfortable.